Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for staying awake until now. So the previous two talks actually didn't explicitly address the topic of the smart city. I think they were really great discussions about the relationship between technology, digital technology, politics, people, how these are entangled. They gave a lot of insight. My talk is going to engage a little bit more explicitly with the topic of the smart city. I have, first let me introduce myself a bit. I'm Doreen Zandberg. I'm a cultural anthropologist of digital culture, currently based at the University of Amsterdam. And I've been asked to tell you something about some of my recent projects, which all have to do with questions of power and digital technologies. But a lot of those projects actually involve trying to come to terms with what we actually mean with empowerment, citizen empowerment in the context of the smart city. And my explorations have led me to conclude, and I think it's safe to say, that the smart city discourse is a normative discourse. It's based on, and it reinforces particular, very specific beliefs about the relationship between people, power, and digital technologies. And I know that a lot of you, and these beliefs actually affect, to a large extent, the ways in which many smart city projects are being executed. And I know a lot of you are aware of this as well, and a lot of you have also very critical thoughts about this as well, but I haven't really seen any consistent effort to come to terms with this issue in a consistent way. And so I thought I'd try to use my 10 minutes to try and unpack this question a little bit, and I hope to, hopefully it will lead to, it will feed in a productive way into the discussion that we might have in the end. Just to give you an idea of how I'm situated in the debate, for over a decade I've studied the cultural politics of our information society, as you can call it. I have studied this at many different sites, amongst others in Silicon Valley and in Amsterdam. And in this work, in particular, I have been intrigued by the almost religious belief that a lot of people have in the transformative powers of digital technologies. And being an ethnographer, I've always also been interested in the ways in which these beliefs affect people in the context of their everyday lives. So in the past few years, I've looked in particular at this idea of the smart city. I've studied several smart city projects. I've also tried to open up a critical debate on the smart city to a larger audience. Together with filmmaker Sarah Blom, I've made a documentary on the ambition of the city of Amsterdam to become a smart city. It's available under a Creative Commons license on the website of the Grip Foundation. You can look it up there, and the URL is here. You can also email me and I'll send you the URL. And currently with a team of researchers at the University of Amsterdam and the University of Maastricht, and also with utility provider Alliander, I'm involved in the study on what you can call equal stakeholdership in the smart city. So as part of all this work, a big question that I have is about what do we mean with citizen empowerment? And this question comes up as part of the promises of the smart city. So let's have a quick look at what these promises are. And we've seen other people talk about this already. But the smart city, as I see it, promises the simultaneous achievement of three things in particular. It promises active citizenship, so it's really about trying to get citizens to be more engaged in their environment, to have a more active attitude towards what's happening around them. The second promise is the promise of digital innovation, which is married also to the promise of economic growth. And smart cities are also very much about trying to find a solution to a lot of huge questions like environmental pollution or global warming, and also about the ways in which such questions play out in the context of urban environments. So they're also about traffic congestion and socioeconomic inequalities also in cities. And these promises, of course, are not just beliefs or promises, in the sense that they're not just thoughts, they actually translate into the typical structure that smart city projects tend to have. And this structure, to a large extent, is imposed by funding institutions and programs dedicated to carry out the smart city agenda. And Horizon 2020, of course, is one of the most influential in this in Europe. So in order to be eligible for funding in the smart city projects, in order to be eligible for funding by Horizon 2020, for instance, in the context of smart city programs, you need to have a public-private consortium. You need to have a team that consists of a private partner, a public organization, and a bunch of volunteering citizens. And usually the organization who receives the funding is given a certain amount of time to showcase the success of the project. Of course, that goes usually through a report, a publication, and an event. The success of the Smart City project also is defined in terms is defined by the extent to which it has managed to deliver on these promises. So these reports need to show success at all three levels. You need to showcase that you've produced some digital innovations as a way of showing your project contributes to this promise of economic growth, an app, a platform, an air quality monitoring device, a sensor network, or whatever. You have to showcase that your project involved citizens in an active way, or that it has activated citizens in particular ways, how it got them involved in certain environmental issues. And you also need to show that it changed the behavior of citizens and the institutions that were involved in particular ways, so as to show that you contribute to the solution of problems like environmental pollution, etc. In all this, a very large, often unaddressed role is played by the fact that the corporation or the public institution or the research institution who has obtained the funding aligns its institutional success and sometimes even its institutional survival with these smart city promises and funding requirements. So it means that they have no choice but to show the success in terms of the smart city funding body. And so everything that happens in the context of these projects that don't fit this framework are often disregarded, or at least they're not given a central stage. So in what ways are these requirements for the success of smart city projects normative? In what ways do they structure what empowerment means in a digital society? They do so by making a priori assumptions about the nature of the relationship between people, digital technologies, and larger social problems. So in these projects, the solution to the problem is a priori defined as being digital. Digital technologies are a priori defined as being empowering. So digital technologies, they teach, they connect, they make profit, they enable control, etc. And the people who participate in these projects, the volunteers, are defined in terms of citizens, entrepreneurs, or users. So these projects just thrive and perpetuate very specific understandings about the nature and ways of working of digital technologies, the reasons and the purposes that frame people's interactions with these technologies, and the scope of the social and environmental problems that affect our lives and question how we can solve them. However, whereas this might be the model of citizen empowerment in the context of the smart city, I think it's something very different to talk about the question of what constitutes people power in a digital society. These are two very different things. So when we explore this larger question of what do we mean with people power in a digital society, I think we cannot merely look at digital technologies as enablers of learning, as bringers of skills, as bringers of networks, of capacities, of giving us bigger senses and more senses. We also need to understand the extent to which these technologies might limit people's power and agency, might distort reality, it might subject people to regimes of control. And we also need to really account for the ways in which our collective beliefs in these digital technologies puts a lot of people in disadvantaged positions, people losing their jobs because of automation, people not being able to keep up, etc. Also, when we explore this larger question of people power in a digital society, we cannot merely think of people as citizens, entrepreneurs, or users, because there might be many other ways in which people fashion their relationship to their surroundings, ways that make more sense to them. Perhaps for people, a lot of power lies in their ability to imagine this relationship in more holistic, ecological, non-capitalist, non-consumerist terms. Also, when we explore this larger question of what power means in this digital society, we can't limit our understanding of what constitutes power and control by only focusing on data gathering, by facilitating citizen sensing, by encouraging more measurements. Because the problems that we deal with, socioeconomic inequality, environmental issues, are caused by dynamics that are in fact beyond the individual's control. And we've also heard this before, right? Other types of approaches, like maybe even political regulation, legislation, might be equally and even more important in this context. So there's also a risk of these projects to give a false sense of control, of facilitating individual responsibilization. So I think it's time to make room, actually, for more additional approaches and narratives, a larger diversity, actually, of understandings of what constitutes people power in a digital society. This might mean, for instance, investing in socio-technical interventions that we don't conventionally think of as being part of a smart city. It might mean investing in people's capacities to also switch off their technologies at certain moments, or even resist the use of it altogether in particular situations. It might mean investing in a social and political culture that acknowledges and encourages also this form of power. It might mean investing in skills, techniques, and a social acceptance also for the ability to defend oneself against being tracked or profiled without being punished for this by being excluded from services or the requirements to pay more for them. It may also mean investing in different economic models that are not dependent on data gathering. It might mean approaching digital technological infrastructures outside of the frameworks of governance and capital. And I think a lot of suggestions have been made about this already earlier today. I know that a lot of you are thinking about these questions already. And just to finish up, I want to point to this new foundation, GRIP. And it's our ambition to actually collect all these initiatives and ways of thinking about this problem. So if you're interested in this, in pushing this debate a bit further, please write to us and we'll talk more about it. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, my name is Thijs Turel from Alliander. Great to be here. As I'm almost the last speaker, I will try to keep it brief and simple as well. I'm involved with this project called Democracy by Design, where we basically try to make sure that the smart city technologies we develop at Alliander are somewhat in line with our democratic values we have as a society. So that's kind of where the project comes from. And today I want to talk to you about one particular idea, which is this idea of a transparent smart charge point. And a charge point is a device meant for charging electric cars. And intelligent means it has this kind of intelligent behavior. Well, why would this be interesting? Well, let's consider the following scenario. Suppose you and your neighbor both have an electric car. You both work maybe 30 kilometers away from your home. And every evening at roughly the same time, both you and your neighbor get back home. And you plug your car into the charge point, one on the left side, one on the right side. And then for some reason, every night it happens, at 8 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock, one green light blinks. And the green light is the light at your neighbor's car. And that green light means it indicates the car is done charging. Yours isn't, for hours. Now, why is this? Is this coincidence? Is this some kind of technological malfunction? Or does it have anything to do with the fact that his company recently bought shares in the company that operates this charge point? Okay. And maybe one other scenario to get the point across. Imagine you have this Chinese electric car, and the charge point in front of your house is owned by some American company. Now, on the news in the evening, you see tensions arising between the Chinese and American governments. And the Chinese recently escalated this by means of a trade embargo against American goods. The next morning, you wake up to find your car not being charged due to some kind of technological malfunction. Well, is it kind of coincidence? Is this some kind of American retaliation, or is it the Chinese trying to make it look like an American retaliation? So you don't know these things. Well, then you might ask yourself, why would we want this kind of concept of smart charging at all? Well, let me get very briefly into the concept of smart charging. What we try to do with smart charging an electric car is basically not charging it the moment it's being plugged in, but to charging it at the optimal time. And that basically consists of three variables. The first thing, indicated by the sun in this image, that we would want the car to charge with as much solar energy as possible, because cars form great ways of storing this kind of sustainable energy, which otherwise is really expensive. The second thing has to do with the grid capacity. The grid we have in our city of Amsterdam and in other cities as well was never designed for such devices as electric cars. So we try to spread the load of these cars charging through time, so we don't have to dig up all these cables and put new ones into place, which is really expensive and not sustainable. And the third thing simply has to do with the electricity price, which varies along the day. So we put these three variables into this big black box in the middle, and out comes this kind of charging instructions for the car, which basically say, well, maybe charge now a little bit, wait for 15 minutes, charge again, wait for an hour and charge. So these are the charging instructions. Now, we use software algorithms to optimize this kind of behavior, to make charging smart. But the optimization doesn't end there, because in the future we will likely go and optimize for more variables, such as your Outlook schedule. Maybe the charging point will check your schedule to see when you're really done with your meeting and accustomate the charging schedule to that. So optimization goes on and on and on. But the thing is, this is largely happening, or all of it is happening outside of the control of the user and also outside of the knowledge of the user, actually. So you have no way of figuring out whether you're being treated fairly by the system, or, for instance, whether your Chinese car is really being treated in a different way than cars from other brands. Well, how can we solve this problem? Together with some ex-Hogeschool van Amsterdam students from Creative Across, we have developed three concepts of how you could tackle this problem by the means of the concept of a transparent smart charge point. And that's kind of a charge point that is designed to be open about the software which is inside of it. Now, as you all know, we as a society have this kind of long-term history with open software, which is called open source. But the thing is, when you try to apply open source concept to objects in the public space, is that it doesn't end up. Because if you want to do something with open source, you basically have to be a programmer to be able to understand it, and you have to be behind a computer. Well, that basically rules out everybody. So we kind of need a new way of thinking about what it means to be transparent about algorithms in these smart objects. Well, the first concept which we developed was the idea of this charge point as a kiosk. And by kiosk, we mean that the charge point itself displays the information about what it's doing to the user, because we feel it's very important that the information should be there at the point in time when it's relevant, and not at some website or some brochure you can get somewhere. The second thought we had, well, why do we not simply show the source code of the software on this device? And then it will be completely transparent about what it's doing, but as you can imagine, it also won't make sense to most people. So we were kind of experimenting with this more abstracted way of displaying what it's doing by basically showing what it's trying to achieve and how it's trying to do so. So it would be something like this. The charge point would explain to you, hi, I'm an intelligent charge point. I'm trying to charge both these cars to the left and to the right of me. I'm programmed to do so with, for the lowest price with the much solar energy as possible, whilst not overburdening the electricity grid. Right now, you can see the sun is shining, so I'd love to charge as fast as possible. But sadly, the electricity grid indicates that it's being overloaded at this point, so I can only charge at half speed. Okay. When you have something like that, at least you give people some basic insight in what's going on behind the scenes of charging. So this might help you navigate through this city, which is enabled with smart devices. And there's a third concept which we would want to add to this idea of a charge point as a kiosk, is the idea that it should also display information to non-users, which are basically people who are also users of the public space, but they're not users in the sense that they use the charge point to charge their car there. And maybe for non-users, you should display information such as, well, this device doesn't track your Wi-Fi. Or, yes, it has a microphone, but it only switches on the microphone if you're in a 1 meter range, and even then, it only stores the information locally and deletes it after 24 hours. So you could do something like that with objects in the public space. Well, the second thing has to do, well, concept was an app, so we do not use the form of the charge point itself, but an app. And the app had two features in our idea. The first one was this kind of search and compare feature. These apps already exist, but this app would allow you to also compare these, the companies which run the charge points. So if you would not want to charge at a charge point which is affiliated to Facebook or Google or the US government or you name it, then you can use this app to navigate around those smart objects. And the second feature is more interesting, and we've dubbed it crowd checking. And what it does, it basically uploads your data to be allowed to compare it to the data of other users. And I can best explain this by means of the process of buying an airline ticket online. We're all familiar with this process, and we all know that if we all would log on right now to buy a ticket to New York, we would all get different prices depending on, and then it gets a bit vague. Does it depend on your browser version, or does it depend on the kind of whether you use an Apple device or a Windows device? We don't know exactly for sure. So what if we would all upload like our buying history to this one big analysis, and we could maybe reverse engineer in what way these algorithms distinguish between us as customers. So you could not only do that with airline tickets, but you could maybe also do this with charging data. So you upload your data, have it compared to other users, and then you can maybe spot anomalies in the way you're being treated by the system. Well, and the third concept basically focused on the idea of the source code, because we were not really happy because, well, the source code is what you actually want to be transparent about, but nobody can read it. So then you end up with the idea that you need this kind of third party which has these kind of objective experts there, which basically review whether these devices can be trusted or they can't be trusted. A bit like the Consumentengids in Holland, something like that. But there's one big difference, a big problem here, because the Consumentenbond is used to basically reviewing power drills or fridges or things like that. And these objects have a tendency to stay the same after the review. Now, with these kind of smart objects, if there's one thing Dieselgate has taught us, they might not be the same after this review. So you should maybe find this kind of concept to provide a digital seal that actually links a review to a particular version of the software that's being run. So users actually know that the review actually applies to the software that's being run on the device right now. So those are the three concepts in a nutshell. And then I would like to end now by asking myself the question, would this help you as the owner of the Chinese car, of the example I gave in the introduction? Well, the first idea, the idea of the kiosk, it might probably not help you. It will give you some basic insight in what's happening, but I imagine that if this kind of trade war were going on, the problem would be somewhere deeper in the system. Now, the second concept, this idea of crowd checking, that might help you because you might easily spot anomalies because, like all Chinese cars, are suddenly from one particular time being treated different than cars produced in other nations. But when you really want to prove that, you kind of really need this kind of expert judgment, so people who really know how to read software and program software and can see whether you're being treated differently. So, yeah, in one sense, you would say that all three concepts could be useful, but only for particular parts of the problem. Well, that basically sums it up, I think. Thank you.